The morning light had not yet touched the horizon when Malik Ward rose from the creaking cot in his small, dimly lit apartment. The room smelled faintly of old paint and coffee that had gone cold overnight. Beside him, a small child stirred, Nia, his 7-year-old daughter, wrapped in a thin blanket that failed to keep away the winter chill that had crept in through cracked window edges. Her little hands, curled into fists beneath her chin, looked fragile against the rough fabric of the blanket. Malik's gaze lingered on her for a moment, a quiet smile breaking through the fatigue that had settled deep in his bones. Every breath he took was for her, every calloused palm, every sleepless night, every aching muscle. Life had not been kind to Malik, but he had learned that kindness was never about how much one had to give. It was about how much one was willing to share, even when there was nothing left. The clock on the peeling wall read 4:50 a.m. Outside, the city was still asleep. A few lonely headlights moved across the misty streets, scattering light through the fog that hung low like a tired ghost. Malik dressed in silence, same gray work jacket, same faded jeans, same worn boots that had carried him through endless shifts. He moved quietly, careful not to wake Nia, then slipped a few dollar bills from a jar marked Nia's school and tucked them into his pocket. He would need bus fare, maybe a cup of coffee to stay awake through another 12-hour shift. But even that simple plan carried a kind of weight. Every dollar spent felt like a decision between survival and sacrifice. As he stepped outside, the cold wind hit him like a wall. His breath turned to mist. The old apartment building behind him stood silent except for the faint hum of power lines. The world seemed frozen, not just in temperature, but in spirit. The warehouse where he worked loomed several blocks away, its lights already flickering in the distance like tired sentinels. Malik walked instead of taking the bus. He had done the math too many times to justify even the smallest expense. Each footstep crunched on thin layers of frost. The city's heart was slow at this hour. Empty sidewalks, quiet storefronts, the smell of damp asphalt, and distant coffee shops beginning to stir. Inside the warehouse, the air was thick with the scent of metal, grease, and the distant hiss of machinery. Dozens of workers moved like shadows between pallets of cargo. Malik took his place among them, head down, hands steady, rhythm unbroken. The world of manual labor was one of repetition, lift, move, drop, breathe. Each motion mechanical, yet laced with quiet purpose. Hours passed in silence, marked only by the sound of forklifts and the occasional clatter of boxes. When the lunch whistle finally blew, Malik sat on an overturned crate near the loading dock. He opened his lunch bag, a sandwich made from yesterday's leftovers. He didn't eat immediately. Instead, he reached into his pocket, pulling out the folded bills he'd saved from the jar that morning. He counted them, enough for bread, milk, and maybe another pack of batteries for the broken heater. His thumb brushed over the edges of the paper, edges that felt thinner every week. As he lifted his head, something outside caught his attention, a figure slumped near the chain link fence just beyond the warehouse's loading bay. A man. Older, wrapped in layers of torn fabric, his bare feet pressed against the icy concrete. Steam rose faintly from the ground where his breath met the cold. Malik blinked twice, unsure if what he saw was real. The man wasn't moving much, just sitting, staring at nothing, as though waiting for the end of something that had already left him. Malik looked away at first. The image was too familiar. Poverty recognized poverty, and it hurt more when you saw yourself mirrored in someone else's suffering. He closed his lunch bag and stood, pulling his jacket tighter. His shift wasn't over yet. He told himself that maybe the man would find shelter somewhere else, that someone better equipped would stop and help. But the thought refused to fade. It followed him through every task that afternoon, echoing in the back of his mind like a whisper that could be you. That could be your tomorrow. By the time the shift ended, the winter sky had turned dark again, streaked with thin veins of violet and gray. Malik stepped outside, breath fogging in the air, and there, still, was the man. curled into the same position, shivering, feet red and raw from exposure. For a long moment, Malik just stood there. Around him, other workers passed by without a glance, their faces numb from habit, but Malik couldn't move. Something deep inside, a pulse, a memory, maybe just his own humanity, pushed him forward. He reached into his pocket. The bills were still there. His rent money, Nia's milk money, the last fragments of a paycheck that had already been swallowed by debt. He looked at them, then at the man. The decision was simple and impossible at the same time. An hour later, Malik walked into a small, aging shoe store at the corner of Jefferson Street. The owner, an older man stacking boxes, looked up as Malik entered. The smell of rubber and leather filled the air. Rows upon rows of shoes lined the walls, hundreds of pairs he could never afford for himself, yet was about to buy for someone else. He didn't look for the cheapest pair, he looked for the warmest. Thick solace lined insides, durable stitching. He held the boots like something sacred as he paid. The few bills he had left felt lighter than ever when they left his hand, but strangely, his heart did not. Outside, the temperature had dropped. Malik's breath came in sharp puffs as he returned to the alley. The man was still there, asleep, perhaps unconscious. Malik placed the shoebox beside him carefully, as if setting down an offering. He stood there for a moment, hands in his pockets, watching his breath disappear into the cold. The stranger stirred slightly, opening tired eyes that glimmered with confusion, then disbelief. But Malik didn't stay for the gratitude he knew might follow. He simply turned and walked away. The wind howled as he made his way home. His jacket wasn't enough. His stomach ached from hunger. But beneath the fatigue, there was an odd calm, a warmth that came not from comfort, but from compassion. A kind of peace that no amount of money had ever bought him. When he reached home, the heater had gone out again. He wrapped Nia tighter in her blanket, kissed her forehead, and sat beside her on the floor. The city outside flickered with distant lights, some belonging to people who had everything, others to people who had nothing. Malik wondered which one he was closer to, but he didn't feel empty anymore. He fell asleep to the hum of silence, unaware that fate had taken notice. That somewhere across the city, a chain of events had already begun, one that would rewrite his destiny in ways he could never have imagined. If this story has already touched your heart, make sure to subscribe and hit the like button. Because sometimes the smallest act of kindness becomes the most powerful miracle, and we share stories like every week to remind you that hope is never lost. The city never truly slept, but some corners of it dreamt more quietly than others. On the far edge of town, where the streets cracked like tired hands and lamplight flickered against walls of chipped brick, Malik Ward moved like a man carrying the world on his shoulders. The gray morning that followed the bitter night arrived without promise. Inside the warehouse, engines coughed awake. Forklifts beeped, their lights cutting through the haze of dust that hung in the rafters. Malik had been here for years, lifting, stacking, sealing, each movement identical to the last, each day a rehearsal for endurance. Yet behind his silent rhythm lived a single purpose, his daughter, Nia. He often thought of her laugh echoing in this space, how it would sound like a song rising above the machinery. That thought alone was enough to push another hour, another shift, another ache in his back. During lunch, Malik sat by the window that faced the loading bay. The glass was filmed with grime, but he could still see the faint shimmer of snowflakes beginning to fall. They melted as soon as they touched the concrete, fragile, temporary, like the dreams of men who labored too long and earned too little. He unwrapped his sandwich slowly. Half-stale bread, thin peanut butter. He ate without tasting. The rhythm of life at the bottom was not about flavor or pleasure. It was about survival measured in small, quiet sacrifices. When the supervisor's whistle echoed, Malik returned to his post. A pallet of boxes shifted above him. He steadied it with a quick motion, calloused hands catching splinters. The air smelled of dust and diesel. Sweat mixed with the cold that drifted through the cracked loading dock doors. and then he saw it, a flash of movement beyond the gate. A figure slumped against the fence, bare feet pressed against the frozen ground. At first, he thought it was a shadow, but the shadow breathed. The sight lodged in his mind like a splinter. He turned back to work, but the image refused to fade. Every time he lifted another box, he felt the weight of those uncovered feet pressing on his conscience. That night, when the shift bell finally rang, Malik lingered by the doorway. The other men filed out, laughing about weekend plans he could never afford. Malik adjusted his jacket, pulled his beanie lower, and stepped into the evening chill. The figure was still there. Wine scraped along the alley like sandpaper. Snowflakes had begun to collect in the gutter, turning black where they touched the street oil. Malik's boots crunched as he walked closer. The man by the fence was older, gray in beard and hollow in cheek. The coat around his shoulders was no protection at all, just a threadbare remnant of something that had once been warm. His hands were cupped together, trembling around nothing. His feet were swollen and raw, toes red and cracked open from exposure. Malik froze. The logical voice in his head spoke first, "You have nothing to spare." But another voice, quieter yet deeper, whispered the truth he couldn't escape, that could be you. The man did not look up. Perhaps he had stopped expecting mercy. For a moment, Malik's heart became a battlefield between need and compassion. He thought of Nya, of the rent notice folded on the counter, of the empty jar half full of coins. He could almost feel the hunger waiting at home. Still, he could not walk away. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the worn bills he'd counted that morning. The edges trembled in his fingers. In that instant, Malik realized he wasn't just choosing between money and generosity. He was choosing the kind of man he wanted to be when his daughter grew old enough to understand what love looked like. He turned toward the nearest bus stop sign, its metal pole slick with frost. Beyond it, a faint glow marked the corner where a tiny all-night shoe store kept its lights burning for drifters and delivery drivers. Malik started walking. The bell above the shoe store door rang with a lonely chime. Inside, fluorescent lights buzzed against walls lined with cardboard boxes. The air smelled of rubber, dust, and faint cinnamon, someone's forgotten air freshener. Malik paused just inside the doorway, breathing warmth back into his fingers. He didn't belong here, not at this hour, not with so little in his wallet. But compassion doesn't wait for permission, it simply moves. Rows of shoes filled the narrow aisles. Dress shoes polished to mirrors, sneakers bright as morning, boots built to defy winter. Malik's eyes landed on a pair of heavy leather work boots, dark brown, thick-soled, lined with soft fleece inside. They were made to endure hardship, much like him. He turned the price tag. It was almost every dollar he had left. He hesitated only a moment before walking to the counter. The clerk, weary and half asleep, barely looked up. Malik placed the boots down, their weight solid and final, and slid the cash forward. The bills looked small against the counter's varnished wood. As the receipt printed, Malik felt a strange calm spread through him, a quiet defiance against the poverty that had tried to make him selfish. The clerk begged the box and handed it over with a distracted nod. Malik took it carefully, like something holy. Outside, the night struck him full in the face. Wind hissed between the buildings. The shoebox, pressed against his chest, radiated warmth that wasn't real but felt alive. He retraced his steps toward the warehouse fence, each footfall echoing on empty pavement. When he reached the spot, the man was still there, half collapsed now, his breathing shallow. Malik crouched, set the box beside him, and rested one gloved hand on the lid. The stranger stirred. His eyes flickered open, pale, lost, uncertain. Malik met them for only a heartbeat before standing. There was nothing more to say, even if words had existed. He walked away through the falling snow, leaving behind the one gift he could give. The walk home felt longer than usual. The city was silent except for the whisper of wind pushing stray trash across the street. Every step Malik took seemed heavier, yet his chest felt strangely lighter, as if he had emptied a burden too large to name. By the time he reached his apartment, the old brick building seemed to shrink further into itself. Paint peeled from the door frames, and a single bulb buzzed above the entrance like a tired eye refusing to close. Inside, the air was brittle with cold. The heater had given up again during the day. Malik exhaled, watching his own breath drift like smoke. He checked on Nia. She was asleep, tiny body curled beneath a pile of mismatched blankets. Her small hand clutched a stuffed rabbit missing one ear. He smiled faintly and adjusted the blanket around her shoulders. Then he sat at the kitchen table, where unpaid bills formed a small mountain of quiet accusation. The jar labeled Nia's school sat half empty, coins glinting weakly under the flicker of the bulb. Malik placed his wallet beside it. Empty. Yet he didn't feel regret. He felt peace. A deep, still peace that filled the silence between the ticking of the cheap clock on the wall. For the first time in months, he didn't feel powerless. He poured himself a glass of tap water, drank slowly, and lay down on the floor near Nia's bed. The chill from the linoleum seeped through his clothes, but his mind drifted to the stranger's face, the eyes that had opened with disbelief, the small shiver that ran through his frame. Somewhere, that man was sleeping a little warmer tonight. Malik closed his eyes. The city hummed softly beyond the window. Snow began to fall again, painting the streets white, hiding the footprints that led to his quiet act of kindness. What he didn't know was that the world had already noticed him. That fate, in its quiet and unpredictable rhythm, had begun to turn. Somewhere beyond those gray clouds, a chain of miracles had already been set in motion, one that would arrive on his doorstep before the next sunrise and change everything he believed about life, about luck, and about love. Sleep didn't come easily. The tiny apartment had grown colder by the hour, every gust through the window pane slicing the air like invisible blades. Malik Ward lay on the floor near the small mattress where Nya slept, her breath shallow but steady. The flickering bulb overhead surrendered and went dark, leaving only the orange wash of a streetlight leaking through the curtain. He stared at the cracked ceiling. The silence felt heavier than the hunger gnawing in his stomach. His mind replayed the day warehouse noise, aching arms, the stranger's hollow eyes, the box of boots he'd left behind. A voice whispered that he had been foolish. Another told him he had done what mattered most. Between those two truths, exhaustion finally pulled him under. Dreams came fractured. He saw his daughter running barefoot through snow, her footprints glowing faintly, each step melting into light. Somewhere behind her, a faceless man placed a shoebox upon the ground, and the snow around it turned gold. Malik reached for it and woke to darkness again. He rose quietly, checked the heater still dead, and wrapped an extra blanket around Nia. The clock read 3:17 a.m. Outside, the wind moaned across the alley. He whispered a thank you to the silence, not sure if anyone or anything was listening. The first knock startled him. At 7:02 a.m., light crept through the frosted window. Malik blinked, half convinced he had imagined it. Then came another knock, measured, polite, deliberate. He opened the door slowly. Cold air rushed in, carrying with it the crisp scent of snow and gasoline. On the curb outside stood a black sedan, gleaming even beneath the dull sky. Beside it, a man in a charcoal coat held a thick envelope sealed with a golden emblem. The man said nothing that Malik could hear from where he stood. Only a small gesture, an extended hand offering the envelope, and a nod toward the car waiting behind him. Malik's heartbeat thudded in his ears. The envelope was heavy, embossed with a crest he didn't recognize, a circle surrounding the joined hands and a flame between them. Inside, on pristine paper, elegant handwriting curved across the top. Mr. Malik Ward, someone wishes to thank you personally for what you did last night. Please be ready by 9 o'clock. No name, no signature. Only a card attached with an address across town. He turned the envelope over again and again, unable to piece together any logic that fit. All he knew was that something extraordinary had brushed against his ordinary life. By 8:30, Malik had left Nia with the neighbor who sometimes watched her. He wore his cleanest clothes, the same jacket, brushed free of dust, and shoes cracked at the sides. The bus ride across town felt unreal. Streets rolled by like pages turning in a story he hadn't written. He clutched the envelope the whole way, its paper edges softened by his nervous grip. Every landmark they passed, the bakery, the shuttered cinema, the church on the hill seemed brighter, sharper, as though the world itself knew something he didn't. When the bus stopped at Jefferson and 13th, Malik stepped into a different neighborhood altogether. Brick gave way to glass. The air smelled of roasted coffee instead of gasoline. The address led him to a community resource center, a modern building of white stone and some light. Banners flapped gently near the entrance, the Compassion Foundation. Inside, warmth wrapped around him instantly. The receptionist smiled and directed him toward a small meeting room. On the table waited tea, biscuits, and another envelope bearing his name. A photograph rested beside it of the stranger from last night, now clean-shaven, dressed in a tailored coat, smiling faintly at the camera. Malik's knees almost gave way. The same eyes, the same face, but alive, transformed. A foundation representative entered, a calm woman with a gentle smile. She carried a small folder marked with the same crest that had sealed the letter. She told Malik about a project started by the man he had helped, a philanthropist who once lived homeless himself, now dedicating his fortune to finding and rewarding quiet acts of compassion across the country. Malik listened in stunned silence. The representative opened the folder. Inside was a printed statement of donation and employment offer, a full-time position with the foundation's logistics team, a new apartment arranged, and an education fund opened under Nya Evans's name. The words on the page blurred through tears he hadn't realized were falling. The woman slid a handwritten note across the table. On it, the same graceful script as before. The warmth you gave returned tenfold. Pass it forward. In that instant, the weight Malik had carried for years dissolved. The exhaustion, the hunger, the endless struggle, replaced by a single, overwhelming truth. Kindness always circles back, even if it takes the long way home. The room was still except for the ticking of a clock on the far wall. Malik Ward sat motionless, the folder open before him. Every line of text blurred and sharpened again as though his eyes refused to believe what they saw. Across the table, the foundation representative continued to explain how it began. The man Malik had helped, known publicly as Henry Carter, a reclusive philanthropist, had once lived on the streets years before fortune found him. Henry often tested the compassion of strangers, quietly giving before asking for anything in return. His final act before falling ill had been to walk the city in anonymity, searching for someone who would give without expecting reward. Malik's breath caught. That night outside the diner had not been a random act of pity, it had been destiny unfolding in disguise. On the folder's last page, there was a printed statement from Henry himself, written weeks before his passing. If kindness finds me when I am invisible, I will make sure the world sees the heart that showed it. Beneath the message, Henry's signature curved like a promise across the paper. Malik pressed his palm against the page, feeling the faint imprint of ink as though it were a heartbeat. For the first time in his life, he wept openly. Not from grief, but from the unbearable lightness of gratitude, the realization that every sacrifice, every cold night, every struggle had not gone unseen. He wasn't just being rewarded, he was being seen. And in that seeing, Malik Ward understood what miracle truly meant. Days passed like golden blur. The foundation moved quickly, first a meeting, then a set of keys, then a handshake that felt like a closing chapter. Malik and Nya Evans packed their few belongings into 2 boxes and stepped out of the apartment that had held more struggle than comfort. Their new home wasn't luxurious, but it was warm. A modest apartment near a small park, sunlight spilling through wide windows, heater humming steadily, walls freshly painted in soft beige. Nya danced across the floorboards barefoot, her laughter bouncing off walls that had never known her tears. Malik unpacked the shoebox that once held his worn work boots and placed something new inside, a folded note, the one that had arrived with the foundation's letter. He set it on a small shelf near the door beside a framed photo of Nya, marking the beginning of their new life. Weeks later, he began his first day at the Foundation's logistics team. The same hands that once carried boxes for survival now moved supplies destined for homeless shelters, schools, and orphanages. Each shipment he organized felt like sending hope to another version of himself. The pay was fair. The gratitude was immense. The peace immeasurable. Malik had never imagined that a single act of kindness could ripple so wide. But each morning when he put on his badge and walked into that bright building, he knew he was living proof that generosity multiplies. Months flowed by quietly, and kindness began to echo. Malik's story traveled first within the Foundation, then through local news, and soon across social media. People watched, shared, and wept over the story of a poor father who gave everything to help a stranger and received everything he'd once prayed for in return. Donations poured into the Foundation, labeled the Shoe Gift Fund. Within weeks, hundreds of new pairs of boots and shoes were distributed to shelters across the city. Malik personally delivered the first batch. Each pair he handed out reminded him of that freezing night, of how desperation could bloom into destiny. Everywhere he went, he told others the same thing. It isn't about how much we have, it's about how much we give when we have nothing. He never sought credit. He never tried to make headlines. He only wanted to make sure no one else had to choose between compassion and survival. At home, Nya drew a picture one evening, a man giving a box to another under a snowy sky. At the bottom, in her careful handwriting, she wrote, "My dad helps people." Malik hung it on the wall beside the shoebox note. Underneath it, he added a single word that defined everything they had lived through: faith. The world had turned again to spring, trees lined the sidewalks with pale green, and the morning sun rose over the rooftops like a blessing. Malik walked hand in hand with Nya down a quiet street leading to her school. The air smelled of rain and new beginnings. Nya's shoes, small, sturdy, clean, clicked softly against the pavement. She wore her favorite backpack, its cartoon patch bright against her jacket. Malik glanced at it and smiled. It reminded him of everything they had overcome. At the school gate, she waved and ran ahead. Malik watched her go, pride swelling quietly in his chest. He took a deep breath, feeling the sunlight on his face, and sat on a nearby bench. From his pocket, he drew a small folded note, the same one from the stranger, edges worn now from being opened too many times. He read it once more. "The warmth you gave returned tenfold. Pass it forward." He looked around the city alive, people hurrying, a boy helping an old woman cross the street, a bus driver smiling at a passenger, a man handing coffee to a stranger. The chain had continued. Malik leaned back, eyes closing against the brightness. A gentle wind moved through the trees, carrying laughter and the faint sound of children's voices. And as the narrator's voice softened, the final truth settled. Sometimes miracles don't arrive with thunder or light. Sometimes they come quietly wrapped in worn paper, handed to someone who chose kindness when the world expected nothing. Malik Ward had been poor once, but he had never been empty. And because he gave, the universe gave back tenfold and more. This was the story of Malik Ward, a father who proved that kindness costs little but changes everything. If you believe the smallest act of compassion can create a miracle, like this video, share it, and subscribe to the channel for more life-changing stories.